My father didn't see me walk in. I was standing less than 10 feet away from him when he said it, loud enough for the whole front hallway to hear. Only people who matter are here tonight. That's how I wanted it. He was talking to my uncle. He didn't know I was behind him. Or maybe he did. With my father, you could never quite be sure. I didn't move. I just stood there in the doorway of my grandmother's house, holding a casserole dish I'd driven 4 hours to bring, and I thought, this is exactly why I almost didn't come. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old, and for most of my adult life, my family has believed I am, in the most generous version of their opinion, a disappointment, and in the less generous version, a cautionary tale they bring up at dinners I'm not invited to. Let me explain how that happened. I grew up in a small town in central Ohio, the second of 3 children. My older brother, Marcus, went into finance, got his MBA at 25, married well, bought a house in a suburb that has a name people actually recognize. My younger sister, Diane, followed my father into education. She teaches 3rd grade 2 towns over from where we grew up, and my father tells anyone who will listen that she has a gift for it. And then there's me. I left home at 18 on a partial academic scholarship to a university in Pennsylvania. I studied biochemistry, then stayed for a master's, then kept going. My family came to my college graduation, but not my graduate one. My father said the drive was too long. My mother said she couldn't get the time off work, which might have been true. Diane sent a card that said, "Congrats," with 2 exclamation points, which I kept anyway because it was the most enthusiasm any of them had shown about anything I'd done in years. After that, I moved to Boston for a research fellowship, then to a hospital-affiliated lab outside of Philadelphia. I was working in surgical oncology research, specifically in how tumors respond to targeted therapy at the cellular level. I won't pretend that's easy to explain at a family dinner, and I won't pretend I always had the patience to try. Maybe that was my fault. Probably some of it was. What I can tell you is that every time I called home, the conversation went the same way. My father would ask if I was still doing the lab stuff. My mother would ask if I'd met anyone. Marcus would tell me about his bonus. Diane would talk about her students. And I would sit on the edge of my bed in whatever apartment I was renting that year and feel like I was calling from a different planet. The distance wasn't just geographic. It was something harder to name. I had built a life that made complete sense to me and almost no sense to them. And after a while, I stopped trying to translate it. I didn't tell them about the publication in the journal. I didn't tell them when I was asked to present at a conference in Chicago, when I was named to a position that came with my own team, my own lab, my own funding, my own work. I mentioned it once, briefly, in a phone call that my father ended early because the game was on. He said, "That's great, Claire. Good for you." The same tone he used when Diane's class won a pizza party for reading the most books in the district. I don't say that to be cruel about Diane's class. I say it because that's the sound that had followed me for over a decade, the specific flatness of being acknowledged without being seen. So I stopped sharing. Not out of spite. Out of something that felt more like self-preservation. If I didn't offer it, they couldn't dismiss it. And if they couldn't dismiss it, I could keep it whole. The gathering at my grandmother's house was for her 80th birthday. She had asked that everyone come. My grandmother, my father's mother, is one of the few people in my family with whom I have always felt genuinely comfortable. She is sharp and funny, and she has never once asked me why I wasn't married. When I told her, years ago, what my research was actually about, she listened for 40 minutes and asked questions that were better than the ones I'd gotten from colleagues. I came because she asked me to. And I brought the casserole because it's her favorite, and I know how to make it, and it felt like the most honest thing I could offer. I was standing in the doorway when my father said what he said. He turned around a moment later and saw me. Something moved across his face. Not quite guilt, not quite welcome. He landed somewhere in the middle. "Claire," he said, "you made it." "I made it," I said. He looked at the casserole dish. "You didn't have to do that. I wanted to." He nodded and turned back to my uncle, and that was the greeting. 4 hours of driving, and that was the greeting. My grandmother found me in the kitchen 20 minutes later. She put both hands on my face the way she always has, looked at me for a moment like she was checking something, and then said, "You look tired." "I'm okay," I said. "You're allowed to not be okay," she said. "This family is exhausting." I laughed. It was the first real thing I'd felt since I walked in. The evening went the way these evenings go. My mother moved around the room making sure people had enough to eat, which is her way of being present without having to sit still long enough to have a real conversation. Marcus held court near the fireplace talking about a deal he was working on. Diane's kids ran through the hallway and everyone said how wonderful they were, and they were, genuinely. They're good kids and I love them. My father stood at the center of everything the way he always has, the gravity in the room, the person everyone unconsciously orients toward. I found a seat near my grandmother and stayed close to her. We talked. She told me about a documentary she'd watched about deep-sea creatures. She asked about my work with a specificity that still surprised me. She had remembered something I'd told her 2 years ago and wanted to know if it had gone anywhere. "It went somewhere," I told her. "It actually went pretty far." "Tell me," she said, and I did, quietly just to her, while the rest of the room did what it did. I didn't notice my father had moved until he was standing near enough to hear. I don't know how long he'd been there. I was explaining something about a clinical trial, a therapy that had come out of the research my team had been doing, the years of work that had finally moved from the lab into actual patient care. My grandmother's eyes were bright. She was leaning forward. "How many patients?" she asked. "So far, in the trial, 43. The outcomes in the first cohort were..." I stopped. I'd caught my father's expression. It wasn't what I expected. It wasn't dismissal. It was something closer to confusion. "What trial?" he said. I looked at him. "It's a clinical trial," he said. I looked at him. "For a targeted therapy my team developed. For a specific type of pancreatic tumor." He stared at me. "Your team, yes. You have a team. I run a lab," I said. "I've run it for 3 years. He was quiet for a moment in a way that felt different from his usual quiet. Then he said, "I didn't know that." "I told you," I said. "It came out more evenly than I expected. A few years ago, you were watching the game." He didn't say anything. I didn't push it. My grandmother reached over and put her hand on mine. The moment passed. Someone called from the other room that dinner was ready. My father walked away. I sat there for a second, and then I got up and helped bring dishes to the table. Dinner was crowded and loud in the way big family dinners are. My father sat at the head of the table. I sat toward the middle, between my grandmother and one of Marcus's kids, who wanted to tell me about a video game in considerable detail, which I was genuinely happy to hear about. It was when the conversation turned to what everyone was doing these days that things shifted. My father was in the middle of explaining something about Marcus's work, his version of it, which involved a lot of numbers and the word portfolio. When one of my grandmother's friends, a woman named Dr. Ferez, Eleanor Voss, who had apparently driven up from Columbus for the birthday, leaned across the table and looked at me. "Are you Claire?" she asked. "I am," I said. "Claire Hartley? From the Hartley-Brennan lab?" I recognized her name at the same moment she said mine. Dr. Goes. Voss was on the editorial board of a journal I had published in twice. She was also, I would learn later, a colleague of the physician overseeing our clinical trial. "Yes," I said. "That's me." She set down her fork. "I reviewed your paper, the one on stromal resistance mechanisms. I've been following the trial results. The 6-month data is remarkable." She paused. "Truly remarkable. I've been telling people about your work for 2 years. I had no idea you were Dorothy's granddaughter." The table had gone quiet, not all at once. It was a gradual quiet, the kind that moves outward from a center. My grandmother was smiling in a way I hadn't seen before. It wasn't surprise. She had known something was coming. She just hadn't known when. My father was looking at Dr. Voss, then at me. "The 6-month data," he repeated, like he was trying to find the edge of something. Dr. Voss turned to him pleasantly. Your daughter's lab has been working on a therapy for a particularly aggressive form of pancreatic cancer. The early results are some of the most promising I've seen in 20 years in oncology. She's presenting at the national conference in April." She looked back at me. "Are you still planning to?" "Yes," I said. "Good." She picked up her fork again. "The field needs it." I looked at my plate. I was not going to cry at my grandmother's birthday dinner. I had decided that before I even walked in, and I was holding to it. The table started moving again, slowly. Conversations restarted, but not with my father. He was still looking at me with that same expression. The confusion had shifted into something I didn't have a name for right away. I had to look at it for a moment before I recognized it. It was the face of a man trying to reconcile two things that didn't fit together. The daughter he had filed away in a particular drawer with a particular label, and whoever this other person was who had apparently been existing in the world this whole time. I didn't say anything to help him. I had spent a long time reaching across the distance between us, offering pieces of my life in whatever form felt accessible, trying to translate myself into something he could see. I had gotten tired of it. I had stopped. And in the stopping, I had let him keep the version of me that lived in that drawer, and I had moved forward without him, and apparently that had worked out. And I wasn't sure anymore if I was angry about that or just sad about it. My mother caught my eye from across the table. Hers was an expression I'd seen before, too. Careful, watchful, not quite apologetic. She knew things about my work that my father didn't, because she had asked different questions when she called, quieter questions, and I had answered them. She had never told him. I'd never asked her to. I don't entirely know what that arrangement was, but it had existed for years. After dinner, people moved to the living room. My grandmother opened her gifts. She laughed at things and held things up, and was, as she always is, gracious and completely herself. I sat on the arm of the couch nearest to her. Dr. Voss found me again near the end of the evening, when people were starting to say goodbyes. "I hope that wasn't uncomfortable," she said. I genuinely didn't realize. "It's all right," I said. "I'm glad you were here." She studied me for a second. "You should be very proud of what you've built." "I am," I said, and I meant it. That part had never been the problem. My father found me by the front door as I was getting my coat. He stood there for a moment in the way he does when he's working up to something, shifting his weight, looking at a point just past me. I waited. "I didn't know," he said finally. "About the lab. The trial. All of it, I didn't know." "I know you didn't," I said. "That's..." He stopped. "That's significant work, Claire." "It is." He nodded slowly. The silence between us was different from the usual silence. It had weight in it now. Texture. Like there was something that could, theoretically, be said if either of us could find the exact right shape for it. I thought about Dr. Termini, Voss asking me if I was still planning to present in April. I thought about my grandmother leaning forward to hear me. I thought about driving 4 hours with the casserole dish because someone I loved had asked me to come, and showing up anyway, and standing in the doorway listening to my father's voice carry across the room. I thought about the question I had been asking myself, quietly, for a long time, if I had been exactly what he expected me to be. Undirected, struggling, needing something. Would he have loved me more carefully? Would there have been more room? I still didn't have the answer. I wasn't sure I needed it anymore. "I'm glad I came," I told my father. And I was, not for the reason he probably heard it. I was glad because my grandmother had held my face in her hands, because a woman I respected had said the work mattered, because I had sat in that crowded room and felt, for the first time in a long time, that I didn't need it to go any particular way. "Safe drive back," my father said. "Thank you," I said. I hugged my grandmother for a long time by the door. She held on a beat longer than usual. "You know what I'm most proud of?" she said quietly. "What?" "You never stopped. All those years. You just never stopped." I drove home in the dark. 4 hours back the way I'd come, through small towns and long stretches of highway with not much on either side. I had the radio on low. I wasn't thinking about my father. I was thinking about the trial, about the 43 patients, about the second cohort we were preparing to enroll, and the data we'd been waiting on, and the meeting I had on Monday with the physician lead, and all the specific, particular, real work that was waiting for me on the other side of the weekend. My phone lit up on the passenger seat just before midnight. I didn't look at it until I stopped for gas outside Columbus. It was a text from my mother. Short. She's not someone who says much in writing. I've always known, it said. I should have said it more. Drive safe. I stood there at the gas station for a moment in the cold under the fluorescent lights, and I read it twice. Then I got back in the car and kept driving. There's something I've learned, slowly over more years than I'd like to admit. You can't force someone to see you. You can stand in a room with them your whole life, and if they've decided what you are, that decision lives in them, not in you. The only thing you can do is keep building the thing you're building. Keep going to the lab on the days it's hard. Keep showing up. Let the work be what it is. And sometimes, not always, not on your timeline, not in the way you imagined, something shifts. A stranger says your name across a dinner table. A room goes quiet, and the person who couldn't see you has to stop and look. I don't know what happens with my father now. I don't know if this is the beginning of something or just a single moment that passes like the others. I know that's not entirely up to me. What I know for certain is this: the work is real. The trial is real. The 43 patients are real. My grandmother asked me questions for 40 minutes, and her eyes were bright, and that was real. That's what I drove home with. That's what I'm keeping.